Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Abundance Tree podcast. I'm Janice, and I'm accompanied by my co-host.
April Capri. Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. How are you,
How
girl?
are you, Janice?
Hey, I'm doing good. It's been busy. Life is life, and girl, I'm telling you. But
Life is life, and Q4 has been like Q14. It's just so much to do. But it's
really,
okay. Yep, we're
and
winding on down to the end of the year.
we are. Speaking of year, we've been at it with this podcast for a year. So we're just so blessed that we have grown our audience organically over the last year, and we're just we're gonna keep pushing on to another year, right?
Yep, keeping it
So,
pushing. Absolutely.
yes. So congratulations to you, April, and thank you again for being on this journey with me. And congratulations to our listeners and supporting us through this past year. And I'm sure we'll see some more growth and welcome some new subscribers soon. So we're excited for better and great things for the next year. So thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Congratulations to you too, Janice.
Oh,
It's been a pleasure being here.
oh, thank you. So we do have a very interesting guest tonight, and so uh, tell us
Yes, we
more about
do.
him. Yeah.
So we have the blind blogger. He turned a family setback into an inspiring journey of entrepreneurship and advocacy. After his family's carnival business closed, he taught himself how to code and launched a site brokering used carnival rides. His story captured attention, and he has since become a prominent voice in accessibility, writing 4 books, traveling solo across the country, and speaking on hundreds of podcasts. He now shares his expertise through writing, speaking, and his podcast, What's Your Excuse? He is an accessibility advisor for Audio Eye and continues to champion the importance of inclusive digital spaces. We have Mr. Maxwell Ivey joining us today. Hi, Max.
Hey, Maxwell.
You're muted.
Zoom minimize
There
image.
you are.
There you go.
Information button.
He's coming in.
Okay.
Audio now unmuted.
Okay, I'm here now.
Okay. And
Hey.
then your video is off.
Recorded view. Collab. Grid view. Janice Lube. Computer leaving Janet. Audio submenu. Start video. Video submenu. Start video button.
There we
Group.
are.
Audio
There
sub
Hey,
we
stop video.
are. Welcome.
hey, Maxwell. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Doing
Doing
well.
well. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on with
Voiceover off.
us.
Well, thank y'all so much for having me. I'm looking forward to us having a great conversation and hopefully encouraging the audience in whatever it is that they're pursuing in their own lives.
Absolutely. Would you like to start by telling us your journey and how you got started?
Sure. Uh, my name is Maxwell Ivey. I'm also known as the Blind Blogger. I grew up in a family of carnival owners, and all I ever wanted to do was be part of the family business, which I was when I was younger. I did go to college. I got a degree in political science, but wasn't able to get into law school. I worked for the Internal Revenue Service for a couple of years before I realized my mental health was worth more than they were paying me. Went back to the carnival business and was involved in the bookings, the games, food, ordering stock, everything except driving, and did that until my dad passed away in 2003. And by 2007, I had to have something new. So I started helping other people sell their used rides on the internet. I had to learn so many things, including teaching myself to code HTML just to get started, and then recruiting clients and setting fees and a lot more. And people were inspired and asked me to share more about being a blind entrepreneur. So I did under the name The Blind Blogger, which was a nickname people had been using for me because at that time there weren't a whole lot of blind people or people with disabilities in general that were really putting themselves out there on the internet. And from there, I've written 4 books. I've traveled the country solo. I've been on hundreds of podcasts. I've spoken and sung at conferences, and I started my own podcast called What's Your Excuse? And in the last few years, I've leaned into all my experience in the area of accessibility because I've been educating business owners about accessibility and inclusion ever since I started in 2007. Leaning into that by speaking, writing, and consulting with companies so that they can benefit from making their products and services more inclusive, and leverage the disability community, which is a huge community with a large reach and a very loyal consumer base, but at the same time improve life for everybody else that does business with the company as a result of embracing accessibility. And nowadays I get to do that, and I really enjoy when I get the opportunity to educate website developers, agency owners, people who, instead of just making one website better, as a result of their better understanding of accessibility, we can improve the lives of hundreds or thousands or even millions of disabled people who have to deal with the internet on a daily basis.
That's
Definitely.
outstanding. So could we go back to the IRS? When you were working for the IRS, I mean, how stressful was that? You said you said that it had a toll on your mental health and all
Yes.
that, and
Yeah. Well,
so go ahead.
Well, you see, with a lot of government agencies that make the effort to hire people with disabilities, they do what are called carve-outs. That basically means they find certain jobs or certain parts of jobs that a disabled person can do with the right technology. My particular job was being primary incoming call answerer person at the number of the automated collections website. And what that means is that when a customer, taxpayer, whatever they call them, got that last final letter that named off all the really horrible bad things the IRS could do to them, I was the person they talked to first.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and they're at that time the IRS was in the middle of a hiring freeze. They couldn't even promote people to higher paying jobs or to different parts of the agency. And so I did that for a while, and in the course of a little over 2 years, I handled 3 suicide complaints where people, it just got so bad they felt like it was time to end things, and we successfully talked them down and managed to get things settled for them so that they were no longer in that sort of a state. But it was not a healthy place to work,
Oh,
and
wow.
and I might have stuck at it if they were paying me more money, but they weren't paying me enough money for what I was doing.
Wow, that you put more perspective in what you were going through there. That is highly stressful, and I can understand where your mental health will be challenged in that environment. So I'd have to
Yeah,
agree.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy. So did that kind of give you the motivation to start your own business?
Well, what got me started with my personal own business was when my family's carnival went out of business. Until then, I was part of a family that operated traveling amusement rides in East Texas. And I still have a cousin who owns a large carnival out of Corpus Christi that travels from Corpus to Nebraska or Minnesota and back every year. They're a very large, multi-million-dollar operation. We were never that big. We, we were a small family operation, and if you go to any shopping mall or major fair nowadays, most of any one ride or game booth costs more than our entire show was worth at any time. So, and I was happy. I felt like we were building something for the future. And when my dad passed away, it was like I lost my friend, my business partner, my mentor. We had spent who knows how many hours going up and down the roads of Texas and Louisiana together. And so for a while, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. It was eventually I got treated for sleep apnea and realized that part of my funk was not getting enough sleep at night. And once I started having a little more energy and a little more passion, I thought, Max, there's lots of things you could do, and you're not the kind of person who's going to do nothing. So what do you know anything about? And at the time, I thought the only thing I knew anything about was helping people sell their used rides, because I had to help my dad sell ours. And I like to say that whether it's the only thing you're good at or you think it's the only thing you're good at, they're the same thing. So I felt like I had to succeed or else. And as I mentioned earlier, the first thing I had to do was teach myself how to build a website because there was no WordPress or Wix or even GoDaddy at that time. And what there wasn't accessible. And I managed to build a website and recruit clients. And even though my first website was not what you'd call pretty or slick, or in some cases not even considered professional by a lot of people who build websites for a living, it helped me sell hundreds of thousands of dollars of rides on 5 continents back when that was my primary focus. And the really cool thing about the selling to use rides, which I still occasionally help one of these small business people sell a ride or buy one. The really cool thing is that brought me to the attention of a lot of people that led me down the road that brought me to where I'm at now. Because I went from carnival owner to ride broker to life coach to podcast guest instructor and booker, and finally to accessibility expert. And so here I am. I know who I am. I know what I'm good at. And by focusing on that now, as opposed to trying to do a bunch of different things at the same time, waiting to see which one will bring in the most reliable income and letting the money decide, it's like, this is what I'm really good at. And the other aspect for me about accessibility is I have an unusual take on the subject because, as I'm sure you know, most people, when they talk about accessibility, they do it in terms of fear of avoiding the penalties of regulations or lawsuits. And they don't do it out of a perspective of love or of the value they can receive for being inclusive. And so I like to say that accessibility isn't just the right thing to do, it's in everyone's best interest, because when you improve accessibility, you improve the user experience for everybody, even those who don't have a disability. You improve the search engine optimization, which means your website, app, and other online content will be found easier. And you give yourself a chance to reach a huge audience that most people ignore. And then in addition to that, if you're an employer or somebody building a team, by being inclusive, you give yourself a chance to hire positive, loyal, dedicated employees who, by the nature of having a disability, have to be creative problem solvers just to get through their daily lives.
Absolutely.
That's
That's beautiful.
it is. That's wonderful. Like I work with high school students, and part of my job is I help all students like for their futures, like either get a job, go to college, get job placed now. And my whole expertise is in more of like job skills training, and so on the job. And so I'm not a VI expert or anything like vision impairment expert. That's other people, but so I can understand and appreciate how accessibility is so important and inclusiveness is so important.
So you,
So
yeah, so you teach soft skills like interview skills,
yes,
interpersonal
and
communication, resume writing, those sorts of things.
at times that's part of it, but another part, if I go on a job site with somebody, then I'm teaching them the job's task. I'm teaching them how to interact with their employers and fellow and I guess employees, their comrades or their coworkers, and I might teach them how to mop. I might teach them how to slice and fruit. It depends on what the job is. So
Right.
a lot of people I'm working with they need help with social skills. They need help physically, that kind of thing. So that's what I do. So I'm very interested to know more about the more technology side of it, where like making your websites more accessible and things of that nature. I'm sure there's softwares out there. So me just starting out, and our podcast, full disclosure, is not really accessible. So if you were to give us some advice to make it more accessible or make our website more accessible, where could we find softwares, or especially for people with a visual impairment, where could we start to start being more inclusive and accessible for people?
Right. Well, one place you could start is a website called Waves, like in on the ocean. And it's
Okay.
a free option that will give you feedback on your website or your blog and let you know what your current ranking is. Some of the website builders like Wix are now starting to build in an accessibility checker. Uh, WordPress does a good job with reminding people to do things that are accessible, but it's got so much of it is built open source by people not employed by WordPress that it really comes down to what plugins and what themes you're going to use as to whether or not you're going to get an accessible product. But if you don't mind, I could share a few things that are especially helpful to podcasters.
Please.
Okay.
Okay. First off, most podcasters are recording in video, but most people consuming your podcasts are consuming them in audio. So besides closed captioning for people with hearing impairments, besides the transcripts, you should consider doing something called an audio description, where you describe what you look like, your nationality, ethnicity, age, race, clothing, and your background if appropriate, because some people blur their backgrounds, so the background isn't really important. And then also describing distinctive clothing, tattoos, anything that would be a visual element that people listening to your podcast on Apple, Spotify, etc., are not going to have access to. That's something you do that's really helpful. Then you want to test your audio player to make sure the buttons are accessible. And if you're going with one of the major players like Blueberry, Squadcast, even if you're using YouTube or one of the social media platforms to broadcast your recordings, those websites have a built-in option for automated transcription. So that's something you consider, at least for the people who are hearing impaired. Here's an interesting stat about people and closed captions. With people under the age of 35, almost 40% of them will not watch a video that doesn't have closed captions. And that's because, as I'm sure y'all can guess, so many of them are watching those videos when they don't want somebody else knowing they're watching those videos. So
Right.
or they're on a train or a bus trying to stay quiet, they're at home with a spouse or a child. But so it's one of those cases where the accessibility thing is very helpful to people who don't need the accessibility, just like the audio descriptions, which are great for video as well as audio, are on a lot of the television programs and movies. And I have friends who can see perfectly who are like, Max, some of my favorite movies made absolutely no sense to me until I listened to them with the audio description and had those narrators telling me stuff that was going on screen that wasn't being said, wasn't part of the dialogue. So some people benefit from that who can't, who do see perfectly well. And then on your website, your blog, however you're distributing your podcast, you want to make sure that that platform uses a keyboard first approach to navigation, because people using adaptive technology, whether that's screen magnification, screen readers, or mechanical switch devices, those generally take over the mouse. So, like, for example, when I'm using my screen reader, I don't have access to a mouse. So design with keyboard access first, use a simple design, take a minimalistic approach, which means the fewer items you can put on a page or a screen, the fewer items you need to put in a form, the better. And then test it yourself and make sure that it works, because just like accessibility improvements can improve user experience, actually testing your forms or your website can give you some indication as to whether or not it may not be accessible, because so many people, they build it or they pay somebody to build it and they never visit their own site. And for me, if I create an email list, I guarantee you I'm going to be the first subscriber to the email list, because I want to make sure it works. Because if it don't work, my content isn't going to be generating subscribers, which means I can't generate any future conversations or opportunities for income if that form doesn't work well. So those would be some of the things I would definitely recommend y'all to look into. And then most people know about the alternative text tags for describing your images. The only thing I would say about alt text is way too many people use those text descriptions to stuff keywords. They basically will have the name of the company, what the company does, and sometimes that's all it says, and it won't tell me anything about it. And I like to tell business owners, look, you spend a lot of time and thought and maybe even a lot of money designing compelling artwork. Don't you want everybody that visits that image to have the same opportunity to be affected by it to the point that they have to want to do business with you? So I don't mind a little keyword stuffing because those alt text descriptions are a great way to be found on the search engines. But, let's just try to do maybe you get up to 150 or 180 characters. So let's say we do the first 70 or 80 characters that describe who's in the image and what it's about. And then the second half, you can tell me about your business.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah.
That's some really good tips, especially
Yeah.
subscribing to your own email list. That's something I failed to do. Um, since you started being like not an advisor, I guess like an advocate, really for accessibility, who do you help? And also the second part to that question is like, what have you discovered as far as like the laws and regulations governing like who has to be accessible and to like what extent?
Right. Well, as far as who I help, I generally end up working with small business owners, what are called sauce level technology companies, website developers, marketing agencies, product developers. I I find that once a company gets to a certain size, they're going to hire one of the more established brand names in the area of accessibility. But I like to point out to people that when they hire me to do the consulting and the advising, that they not only get information on accessibility, but they also get an education on how disabled people use the internet so that they can take advantage of creating workflows that make things much better than the minimum standards required by any regulations that are out there for accessibility. And then, of course, I work with them to promote their website to leverage the fact that disabled people, we love to support companies that provide a quality product or service that are willing to make the effort to include us. So those are some of the things I do for people who I do work with. And of course, I write for several publications, and I'm always open to doing new public speaking events. I just created a workshop for like the basic beginning introductions to digital accessibility that I'm looking forward to finding some speaking events at conferences or organizations that would like to have their team learn more as a way of approaching accessibility more as an organic thing as opposed to, oh no, we got to do this and we got to do it like yesterday or we're going to be in big trouble. So, and then as far as the regulations, physical accessibility is a lot easier. It's a lot clearer, but it still usually will come down to claims of reasonable accommodation and whether or not what you're asking for will harm a business. But at least with physical in-person accessibility, a lot of that is really cut and dry as to what the right answer is, like parking spaces, wheelchair ramps, elevators, etc. But when it comes to digital accessibility, we're still at the point where we don't really have hard regulations. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it does have its place. But the problem is the Americans with Disabilities Act was never intended to be a hammer. It was intended to be a guide rail. And the mechanism for enforcing things under the Americans with Disabilities Act is to file a lawsuit. However, to avoid creating a whole bunch of new lawsuits and making a bunch of lawyers rich, there are caps on how much a lawyer can get paid to bring an accessibility-based suit under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So in general, the suits end up being filed by individuals or nonprofits because there just ain't enough money in it for lawyers to want to do it unless they're doing it for name recognition. Like when you sue a big company like Kmart or Target or Amazon or something, most of those cases were done by companies that were either already well established or, in my humble opinion, were willing to do it thinking that the recognition they would get from the suit wouldn't hurt their business. So, or they may have been firms that were invested in advocacy for its own sake. I'm not 100% sure on that part of it, but the mechanism for enforcing it, the Department of Justice just updated Title II, but that only applies to state, local, and federal government entities. And that has taken some steps to make it more clear and understandable as far as what the rules are. But as I'm sure y'all know, anytime the federal government changes the rules can get changed back or changed in a whole nother direction the next time we have an election. So as it stands right now, the standards for government websites just went way up. We have a new regulation coming online in the UK that's affecting businesses here in the US that want to do business internationally. But for the most part, when it comes to accessibility, it's more along the lines of guidelines and conventions. And these are the things you should do with a little bit of enforcement through legal action rather than being the kind of thing where there are set penalties and the regulations are really clear. And then one other thing about accessibility is there's a minimum recommended standard, a minimum guideline. But I find that the companies that do really well with accessibility, they don't just focus on meeting that minimum guideline as quickly as they can. They focus on making accessibility part of the way they think about their business and their customer base. So I like to work with people who see accessibility as a competitive advantage rather than a regulatory challenge.
Absolutely. That makes a
That
lot
was
of
an
sense.
amazing answer.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
seriously, you covered up so much ground,
Right.
especially in regards to the physical accessibility and the digital accessibility, because I could imagine, we're all aware of the physical, wheelchair ramps, things of that nature. But the digital it's such a murky gray area because it keeps changing. And then we have AI, and I've never really noticed any like set standard or rules. And, like you said, it's something you kind of don't think about until it presents yourself. So that was a really amazing answer, and it sparked a lot of thoughts
It
over
did.
here.
I
Yes, it did.
know in the education space, we have to follow what they call the students individual education plan, or IEP. And so depending on what their disability is, they might get assistive technology, they might get of course accommodations, they might get modified curriculum. I know we do have students with a VI, visual impairment, audio impairment, that do get what they need as far as their assistive technology. It's just those are just areas that I'm not an expert in, and so it's very interesting. Uh, it's just very interesting to learn about it, and I really think that we can make it more of a priority for our website and stuff. Even though we do have captions, but more on the visual impairment side of things like descriptions. That's something that we could probably work on. So
Right. And
that's
to what
amazing.
you were just talking about with education is handled in a totally different manner because I want to say it's Title IV. There's a lot of established Supreme Court law and other state law in the area of accessible education, and the laws that established it, the National Rehabilitation Act and others, are much clearer on what the minimum standards are and what kind of problems you will have if you fail to meet them. So that's a whole other area, and I'm glad to hear that that they're continuing to take a individual approach to learning, because that's one of the biggest challenges with accessibility, is that especially digital, is because there are so many types of disabilities. There's such a wide variety of ability within the disability. I think the people who came up with the idea that autism is a spectrum were genius, because
Yeah.
it avoids the idea that there is one type of autistic. Whereas with visual impairment, there are a lot of people who think that if you have a white cane, it means you're totally blind. Whereas all the white cane means is you're legally blind. So you could be anywhere from 2200 down to no vision at all, anywhere along in there. So when it comes to digital accessibility, you've got multiple disabilities. You've got several different computer operating systems, Mac and Windows, Android and iOS. You have a variety of adaptive technology that people use. And then you have the comfort level, the education level. So it is very challenging. And I feel like one of the biggest assets I bring to this conversation is the empathy that I came by having to build my own website one line at a time for over 5 years, because my site was never accessible either. But at least, by having to put myself through that exercise, I understand how hard it can be. And I feel like that's why we really need to focus more on accessibility being a process, a journey, as opposed to a perfect or a destination. Nobody's ever going to get to 100% accessibility. The internet's never going to get there. It ain't even close right now, but it's like 3% of the internet is totally accessible as of now. So,
Mm.
we need to focus more on it being a continuing effort type of a thing where sincere effort is valued over just simply meeting minimum recommended requirements.
Well
Absolutely. You make
said.
some great
Yeah,
points. What are
certainly.
some tools that you could recommend for people that have difficulties accessing certain things that aren't, readily accessible? What are some outside tools that they can use?
Well, if you're talking about people with a disability, uh, then most people are familiar with screen readers or screen magnifiers. Some of the new things are the wearables, you like the KFB app on most of the iPhones, or things like Orcam or eyesight. And don't ask me how that's spelled, but it's not like eyesight. It's a device that helps people take better advantage of what vision they still have.
Okay.
Orcam is a wearable that can capture text or images and describe them for you without having to be connected to the internet, which is what really makes it cool. There are new laser based and electronic based canes. There's several different methods being expanded on right now to make navigation more accessible, whether you're talking about outside on streets and sidewalks or inside train stations, concert events, or airports. There's Be My Eyes and Way Around. Those are a couple more. Be My Eyes is a crowd-funded option where people sign up to volunteer, and you connect with them using the camera and the microphone in your phone. And you post to their crowd, you say, I need help reading the label on the box of frozen food so I know how long to microwave it for. And somebody will take that assignment and they'll connect with you and they'll look through your camera and they'll tell you, well, you have to microwave it this long and then spin it around and then microwave it some more. Those are some
Oh,
of
that's
the
awesome.
yeah, that's called Be My Eyes. And of course, one of the things is some companies are really starting to leverage Be My Eyes to make their products more accessible to people with disabilities without them having to depend on other technology like talking barcode readers or regular optical character scanners. So there's a lot of cool stuff out there. There are the digital braille displays, which are like tablets that have metal pins that pop up and down to simulate braille that you can connect with your phone or your computer, and then you have access to it in a tactile form as opposed to an audio form. And like say when you're recording a video or you're doing a virtual meeting or something, it may be very great. It may be really cool to have access to your information in a form that isn't going to disturb the conversation with the audio prompts or force you to have to wear your headphones and try to listen to one voice while you're talking to another voice. So there's lots of good stuff out there. There's more stuff coming on every day. And there's even now a three-dimensional braille display that you can use it to represent images in 3 dimensions and then use your hands to experience those images in a tactile form. And there's a few people out there who are influencer types who have started having luck pairing the 3D display with their cameras and then using the 3D display to adjust the image to the point where they're now using to display with their camera to take better photos. So there's some cool stuff out there, and a lot of it has its roots in military research and development from 10 years or 20 years before now. And I would say that if somebody does have a disability, most every state has a state resource center. They have a place where somebody can go and have their physical abilities tested and be exposed to a wide variety of available technology, and then see what might be a good fit for them, both with their physical abilities, their comfort level, and the ability to invest financially, either with their own money or with money from the state or federal government.
That's an amazing resource, actually.
It really is, yeah. It
Where
sure
can people
is.
find you, Max? Where can people find you?
Okay, they can find me at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. They can also send me an email to theaccessibilityadvantage@gmail.com. And I am Maxwell Ivey on all social media accounts except Instagram, where I am the blind blogger. But if they will go to my website or send me an email, and I'd be more than happy to connect them with any information they need, the podcast, the blog, the books, whatever. And I really do look forward to hearing from your audience. I like to say that I'm not one of those people you have to be ready to book, hire, or buy something from in order to talk to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. It's such an honor talking to you. Very interesting. And I've learned a lot. I took notes while you were telling us all the different technologies and stuff. So I so appreciate you coming on with us. I think this was a needed episode. So
Absolutely. I'm going to rewatch and listen to some of the resources that you gave. I work with a lot of seniors and people with disabilities. I'm an insurance person, so I found ways that they can get the items that they need, DME, durable medical equipment, and things of that nature covered by their insurance. So this was some helpful resources and information for me as well. We have 2 minutes left, just under 2 minutes. If I noticed the name of your podcast is What's Your Excuse, correct?
Yep.
What would you tell somebody that has an excuse for not being able to accomplish something that they want to?
I would say that it starts with deciding, and it's important to decide, is this something you wanted or want, or is this something somebody in your circle has told you should want? Because that's the key. If it's something you really want, then you will find solutions instead of making excuses. And I like to tell people, hey, I'm a blind carny kid from East Texas who has always been the fat kid. Most of what I've done has happened because I took the next step available, whether I was ready for it or not. I'm not anything special. I'm just a guy who shows up and does the next thing he has to do because I've decided this is where I want to be and this is where I want to go. So decide. And once you decide, you will find solutions, even if you don't like them. And that's, of course, one of the hard parts. And the other thing is this is something my dad taught me from an early age. When you refuse to ask for help, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received from helping you. So don't try to do this alone.
That's
If you
a
don't know
challenge.
the answers, if you can't come up with the solutions, find somebody, reach out to them, go, hey, would you help?
Thank
absolutely.
you so much, Mr. Ivy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Max, for coming on with us tonight. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.